Hello, and welcome to Archives and Records Simplified. These videos are aimed at people looking for basic knowledge about archives and records management, although at times I will also touch slightly on information and library science. These videos are designed to provide bite-sized chunks, which means that almost every video will be less than 15 minutes. These videos are honestly for everyone, and comments and suggestions are always more than welcome. About me, Sean Macmillan, I'm an archivist based in London, and you can learn more about me via my LinkedIn profile, to which there is a link posted below. And I'll also post a transcript and notes also if you struggle at any point to understand my accent. And lastly, if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could kindly like, subscribe and share. Thanks again. Okay, so this video is a review of an archive I've enjoyed studying. This archive is the Bishopgate Institute in London. Alright, so the Bishopgate Institute in London self-described themselves as the home to a library, historical archives, talks and courses, and I think this is generally quite a succinct and accurate representation of what they do. It's often my experience that many organisations such as these are very fluid and expansive in what they do, and often the term library or archive simply just doesn't account for the range of their activities. And it's also something that's just generally worth thinking about. Many archives and libraries now in particular, I think, are often expected to be more than just a place for hosting materials. Often they are expected to undertake more to engage with their communities and also to promote learning, education and culture. And one of the reasons I've chosen the Bishopgate Institute is because I think they're a fantastic example of that. So a quick overview of their history. They opened on New Year's Day in 1895. So although they have several modern collections, they're actually quite an old institution. As I say, they opened in 1895, so this year marks their 125-year anniversary. And from what I can tell, they're very much connected to their local community in East London. I read somewhere that I think as many as 8,000 people showed up on the day that they opened. So that's quite remarkable, and that's quite interesting. Reverend William Rogers, he founded the institution with the intention of developing an education centre that would benefit his local community. I think I saw a quote about him that said something along the lines that he wanted to do more than just pray, and I thought that was quite interesting. He wanted to do something practical. Sadly, from what I can tell, he died in 1896, and I dare say he probably didn't imagine his legacy would last quite as long as it has. Another key figure that came up during my research was Charles Gross, who was the library's second chief librarian and also really helped establish the library as a more inclusive and welcoming place. And he, from what I can tell, really took the library forward. And, just looking at their history, they do have a long track record as a sort of hub for education, learning and culture. I think I read somewhere that at one point they hosted a number of chess matches. I think from what I read, they hosted the British Chess League for many years as well. So as I say, they seem quite diverse and they seem quite active. Okay, so often with these videos, I think it would be useful if I gave you a sort of overview of the type of collections they have. You'll tend to find that most archive institutions will have a sort of mission statement or a certain type of collection that they focus on. And in terms of Bishopgate, they roughly hold, I would say, from what I've read, 150,000 books, pamphlets, maps and photographs. And it's very fair to say that they have a sort of focus on social history and everyday people, and collections that relate to social, political and cultural change. The feeling I got from researching their history was that they were very much an institution that were developed for the people, rather than maybe just elite groups, which is possibly what libraries were really for in the 19th century. So as I say, they seem to have a very social-minded focus, and I'm also quite impressed by the number of collections they have online. And this includes materials which has been digitised, such as recordings of the Lansbury's Labour Weekly. So just to give a bit more information about this collection, it caught my eye and it is really quite brilliant. George Lansbury was a Labour MP, I think he was later the leader of the party, and he was one of the leading figures in the formation of the Daily Herald, which was a newspaper. And he was unhappy with its less radical stance, and this led him to establish the Lansbury's Labour Weekly in 1925. Circulation of this newspaper reached as much as 172,000, which I think by those standards that would be the equivalent of something going viral online, and it became a really important source of information during the general strike of 1926. So that collection, much of it is online on the website, and you can download audio recordings of his speeches, and these are from well over 50, 60, 70 years. So it's a really, I say almost 100 years old, some of them from what I can tell. So that's a fantastic collection, and I think the fact that you can download that off their website really excited me. They also have a number of collections relating to LGBTQ plus topics, and these appear to be quite far-ranging, include really valuable materials, and not just archives, but they also have things like banners, flyers, and other materials. And I think I remember from their website they also have a lot of ephemera. And it's worth saying that there are, I would say that these are maybe certain collections which have maybe historically been underrepresented in other archives. So I personally think it's very positive that they've actively set out to represent maybe people that aren't getting much of a voice elsewhere, and that's definitely something that really made me quite enthused about them and quite happy to do this video. Okay, so I also wanted to talk about maybe one of their collections which caught my eye. This was a collection titled From a Whisper to a Roar, Love and Protest Stories from LGBT plus Women. And essentially, this is a collection of 41 stories from lesbian, bisexual and trans women, and the stories pertain to their lived experiences. And I have to say, I saw a few really interesting. I mean, all of the accounts were quite interesting, but there were a few that really jumped out at me. For example, I think there was a few of them that were talking about what it was like to be a part of the gay community during the HIV crisis when that was really dominant in the culture. And it was really interesting to read their stories and their accounts of that, especially as maybe before their experiences in that regard hadn't quite been captured as much. I also feel that many of these personal accounts often added a colour and a depth that's often not found in other collections. I really do think there's a value of speaking to people as people and asking them to reflect on their experiences. Sometimes with an archival community, I think we can have a slight preference towards archives that were or records that became archives that were created during the process or during the lifespan of an event. But sometimes I do think people reflecting and telling their stories can also have a real value as well. And I understand that this project stemmed from an oral history project that took place between 2018 and 2019, and thus the discussions were quite recent. And again, this is kind of what I mentioned earlier about how I think archival institutions are now being asked, and libraries are being asked to be more proactive and more engageful. This is really a big example of that. From what I can tell, Bishopgate set out to interview these women, capture their experiences, and make those experiences available online. The interviews are all typed up, they're tagged, and they're made available via PDF, and they can be downloaded from their website. So as I say, like, although the collection, I think, although 41 personal accounts may seem quite small compared to others, you can tell that a lot of work has went into this project, and I think it has a lot of real value, and it's definitely a collection that caught my eye, and I thought just summed up what they do quite well. And I would say one other thing, this collection is one of several that I saw on their website, and I would thoroughly recommend looking at their website for more details. Okay, so something else worth noting are activities and outreach. Now, it's worth noting that I'm recording this video during COVID, so obviously many of the things I'm saying now will be subject to change. And I would say that first things first, I would always look at their website as the first point of reference, rather than this review of their services. But it is really worth noting how active Bishopgate are, and as I say, they really do go beyond simply being a house or a storage facility for archives and library books. The first thing I would say is that their calendar of events is very well designed and worth looking at in the first instance. So essentially you can select in several days and you can see what events are on, and I think that's quite useful. And also their learning programme is just fantastic. I think you can undertake a variety of learning programs, and many of these have been moved online, which I think is very important in the current climate. So for example, I think they had an online course relating to the history of the English language, which I had to say looked really fascinating. And I think, if I remember correctly, they also had a facility where you could buy someone a voucher for a course for Christmas, which I actually think is a good idea. So that's definitely something worth thinking about. If this video goes out before Christmas, then that's something that you could maybe think about if you've got someone you need to buy something for and you're out of ideas. So they also have a mailing list that you can join, and I noticed that they're very active via Twitter and Facebook. I think I noticed that they also held a few Facebook Live events, and if you're on Twitter or Facebook, I would thoroughly recommend following them and looking at what they do. And lastly, I would generally just recommend looking at their website for more details about what they do. This is generally quite a short video, and I'm cramming a lot of information in. I think their website is probably the best source of information, and I would recommend looking at that in the first instance. Okay, and lastly, just a few general details about them for further information. They are, of course, based in East London. I used to live there. That's quite a nice part of London and a very historic part of London. I believe that's quite close to Whitechapel, in the sort of main financial sector. So, as I say, a very, very historic part of London. I believe if you're interested in that period of London, and you have an interest in things that are a bit more morbid, I think that was the area that Jack the Ripper operated in. So a very, very historic area of London. And in order to visit their archives, you would probably need to contact them directly. I also feel it's worth noting that organisations are often heavily reliant on donations, and I would always recommend doing so if able. You tend to find that organisations such as Bishopgate, they tend to be quite community centred, and often they're not funded the same way that a corporation might. Often they are reliant on their communities in order to keep them going. So, as I say, I would never encourage anyone to donate anything that they couldn't afford to do, but if you are able, then it was something I would look at. So otherwise, I hope you've found this video interesting. Normally, I would say if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below. But I would actually say if you have any questions or comments, then maybe it'd be best to ask them first. What I would say though is that if you know of an archive or an institution that you would really like me to cover, then please let me know. I really do enjoy looking at other institutions, what collections they hold, and maybe little things that they're doing that no one else is doing, and also maybe certain services they're offering and how they're maybe going about promoting their collections. So as I said, I really enjoyed this video and I would be grateful for any feedback. Thanks again. And if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could like, subscribe and share. And also just to remind you that I would be absolutely delighted to take any requests for future videos also.